All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 2024 Cyber Risk Wrap-Up webinar. I'm Jeremy Gittler, our Global Head of Claims, and I'm thrilled to have all of you with us today as we dive into the biggest cyber risk trends and claims insights from the past year. Whether you've joined us in the past or this is your first time attending a Resilience Cyber Risk webinar, this session is packed with actionable takeaways to help you better understand the evolving threat landscape. For those of you less familiar with resilience, we connect risk cyber quantification software, which uses the same models and data that we use to underwrite our cyber insurance policies, with cybersecurity experts and A-rated insurance to help our clients better avoid, and when avoidance is not possible, recover from cyber attacks with the least amount of impact. Nobody else in the industry does this. We help clients make better cyber business decisions about where to focus their efforts and investments with an eye on reducing losses as cost effectively as possible. In today's world, being able to take a hit and keep going is just as, or maybe even more important than not getting hit at all. Today, we are joined by two experts who literally live and breathe cyber claims. We have Scott Tenenbaum, our head of claims for North America, and Mitch Gutnick, our director of security engagement and claims. They will walk us through key trends from the rise of vendor risk and ransomware's continued grip to how different sectors were impacted and what 2025 might have in store. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session, and we'll save time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. So let's get into it. So as you see here, here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with key findings, the rise of vendor risk and third party, ransomware's continued dominance, point of failure analysis, critical infrastructure at risk, and looking ahead in 2025.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Sure.
I'd like to give a brief overview of what we've seen in 2024 thus far from our book of business. It should come as no surprise that 40% of the claims we've seen have stemmed out of vendor failures, whether it was CDK, Change Healthcare, CrowdStrike, or PowerSchool. We're in the new wave of vendor disruptions. These incidents have evoked a different way of evaluating risk, which we'll discuss further later on in the presentation. Things to think about as we discuss this further are how have the vendor failures affected your company directly, and what steps your organizations are taking to combat total shutdowns resulting from these incidents. Lastly, how are you evaluating your relationships with your vendors? Another thing that we'll highlight is that ransomware attacks were responsible for nearly half of the claims that we've had on our book of business, whether that was direct ransomware attacks or vendor ransomware attacks. We'll discuss why we're seeing an uptick in ransomware claims. The threat actors are no longer just smashing and grabbing. They're laying out well-laid plan of attacks, and they have a better grasp on who they're attacking and what it means in terms of scope of the attack once it's underway. Additionally, we've seen industries such as healthcare and manufacturing really take a hit. What factors are leading to these industries seeing an uptick? Things to think about are, might the urgency in getting healthcare systems back up and running as soon as possible lead to a more willingness to pay the ransom? Could a lag in digital transformation in manufacturing construction sectors lead to threat actors looking for an easy in? These are all questions to think about. This leads me to my next point. We are no longer in the golden era of settling with threat actors for nominal amounts. This is a money business, and the more the threat actors attack, the more money they'll make. We all know the saying, greed is good. Maybe not so much for insurance carriers, but ultimately speaking, payments to the threat actors are higher than they've ever been, and threat actors are more greedy than they have ever been. When thinking about this topic, we should think about what steps we're taking to ensure that we don't have to pay the threat actor, whether for a decryption key or that dreaded data suppression. While half of our claims arise out of ransomware attacks, fewer than 10% of our insureds actually paid a ransom. So it's just food for thought to think about what steps our insureds are taking to kind of avoid actually paying a ransomware payment. And then lastly, we'll discuss the weakest link in the chain, humans, right? Whether it was Avanti or the Screen Connect CVE, proper patch management was a large driver in our claims. Through our Risk Operations Center, or ROC for short, we notified numerous of our clients of these vulnerabilities, averting the potential for millions of dollars in claims. Combining information between our threat intelligence team, data science team, our claims team, and our underwriters, we're able to help avoid our clients kind of have large scale claims. We'll talk about the steps needed to avoid these claims through best practices throughout the presentation.
Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate that. One thing I just wanted to quickly point out on this slide, you'll notice on the right side, we have percent of material claims in the light green. You'll see 44% of our material claims are from ransomware and 18% are from ransomware impacting a vendor. So that's 44 plus 18 for just ransomware, with number two being transfer fraud. So ransomware still continues to be the number one issue that we are dealing with on the claim side. Let's move on to the next slide. And Scott, let me kick this over to you to discuss the rise of vendor risk and third-party failures.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. And going to walk through the slide with everybody briefly and just talk about some of the reasons for some of the numbers here. But third-party risk is not something new. There was 2017 NotPetya, 2020 SolarWinds. So these attacks go back years. 2023, we saw the Move It attack, and I'm going to talk about Move It a little more, and then the 2024 events that Mitch mentioned, CDK, Change Healthcare, and CrowdStrike a little more. But before I get into that, first the numbers here. To take a quick look at the chart, you could see from what I was just saying, 37% of our claims in 2023 were attributable to third-party risk and vendor failures or a vendor breach of some sort. But then you see on the right bar, 0% of those resulted in material claims. And when we reference material claims, what we're saying is $250,000 or more of incurred losses. So for 2023, 37% of our claims, but 0% of material claims from third-party vendor risk. But if you shift over to the right and just look at the numbers next to it, the frequency of our third-party claims actually went down from 37% to 31% of the portfolio. But what you see on the right is what we're going to talk about a little more now. The material claims rose significantly in 2024. So 23% of our portfolio material claims were due to this vendor third-party risk. So why did that change? These events primarily had a large reason for that, and the way these events unfolded, who it impacted, the operational impact in some, but really just the way the events unfolded, the way these organizations use and the interconnected activities between vendors, which is what we're talking about today. So real quick to get 2023, Move It. What Move It was, owned by Progressive Software, was the name of the company. It was a third-party data transfer software platform. So companies would use this platform to move large batches of data. Move It sustained a breach, so any data that was on the platform was impacted. So there was downstream impact, is what we call that, to customers who used that platform. They are the data owners, so they are ultimately responsible, but the breach was on the Move It platform. So the way that practically played out was that the entity that was breached took responsibility, at least for the first party costs as far as notification. So the way it would impact the downstream insureds and the organizations as we saw it was not a significant amount of first party costs. So, and most would be within the SIR, and if not, did not rise to 250K or more in incurred losses, which is what that is saying on the left side. Our normal vendor notification would be some kind of letter our insured received notice that a vendor they used sustained a data breach. If we're not talking about these large events, that's just sort of a routine. These happen every day. But again, for our practical purposes, we wouldn't expect that those kind of claims would ultimately lead to costs to us, the insurer, sorry. So what changed 2024? We're going to walk through some of these events again, but really just like the way they impacted. So Change Healthcare 2024. Change Healthcare was they're the major healthcare payment processing company in the industry. I think 80% was the number of all payments for healthcare organizations were processed through them. So when they went down, the billing systems were impacted, which really sent shockwaves through the healthcare organization. There was no operational impact to the ultimate organizations, but they couldn't bill for their time. And then some ultimately did turn away customers or patients in those circumstances because they couldn't do the billing. But our understanding was that most operational um, everything went forward, except ultimately they couldn't bill for it. So, what are we talking about as far as practical losses there? Again, the first party costs, Change Healthcare, the entity, for the major burden of the costs as far as notifications, but the way the claims are playing out practically for our organizations, our insured organizations, are did they sustain a business interruption loss? And it's been questionable all along how we were going to see this play out, deferred revenue versus loss of business income. How would that work? Ultimately, that is still crystallizing. We haven't seen that completely play out, but what we have seen is extra expenses submitted. Basically, these organizations are trying to find ways to keep up with the billing and get those bills submitted so they get paid and don't sustain this business interruption loss. So, they've hired external companies to help with that. They've paid their employees extra, hourly employees overtime to get these, billings in and just try to catch up. So that's how we've seen those claims play out on the Change Healthcare matter. But a few of those did lead to losses. So again, you see the little bar on the right. Um, that's one of the reasons why. So just the way that event played out and the impact of the downstream user led to material losses, which we hadn't seen before, certainly in 2023. Just to continue on here, CDK, that was June 2024. So CDK was a software provider specific to car dealerships. So Change Healthcare, specific to healthcare organizations. CDK, more specific to auto dealerships. But the impact was to 15,000 of those across the United States and Canada. So auto dealerships would use this software for financing, inventory, really just day to day assisting in sales. So when this software went down, these auto dealerships could not do that. Some of them, they were reverting to paper and pen to try to keep track of what they were doing. And that did lead to lost sales. But the operational impact to these dealerships, the practical way we saw that play out was business interruption submissions. So we're still seeing it and we're still dealing with it. But again, the way these events play out, who it impacts, and the way the organizations use and are interconnected with each other, that is what has led to what we are seeing in 2024 as far as material losses on these third-party claims.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, it's really important that like insureds test their business continuity and disaster recovery plans, because in the event of like CDK, we saw our insureds ultimately not having workarounds for their systems being down, right? They had to kind of go to manual paper models, but ultimately speaking, they were really they had they were tied in terms of what they could actually do in business. So testing your disaster recovery and business continuity plans is really important to have workarounds in the event that these events actually occur. So
Absolutely, and that's a great point. And we'll talk more about that later, relative to all events, really. So those two were the industry-specific events of 2024. And then the one other event that we wanted to talk about today for 2024 relative to vendor and risk and third-party failures, of course, was CrowdStrike. July 2024. I'm on the East Coast in the United States, woke up to that news. You remember the pictures from the airports and sort of all the chaos, and no one knew what was going on. That's so a lot of claim submissions, but what was the ultimate impact, and how did these play out? And did that contribute to this 23%? We are still seeing those play out, but system failure coverage, that's what we're talking about here. Dependent business interruption, business interruption for an insured organization, a downstream user, but caused by the failure of another company. So, CrowdStrike, that would be how the losses would play out. And we are still looking at a lot of these. But again, for this conversation, we are talking about third-party risk. And while it's not new, it is changing, it is evolving, and what we did see in 2024 is a lot different in 2023 as far as the financial losses from these kind of claims. So, Mitch, were you going to speak more as to business continuity here, or do you want to move on to the ransomware?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it in terms of ransomware on the next slide as well.
Sounds
Sure.
good.
Thank you, guys. Just a couple of points, broader points I just wanted to make with regard to the rise of vendor risk and third-party failures. So, if you think about underwriting to this risk, it's not just about underwriting to one entity or one insured or one organization anymore. The interconnectedness of companies and their suppliers has created the potential for larger cyber risks, more so than we've ever seen before. So, if you think about cyber 10 or 15 years ago and how you underwrote to it, now it's a whole new world based upon software suppliers or your vendors. And we're going to discuss a little later what you can do for your organization to try to stave that off and stave off any claims. But this is not something that's new. If you remember back to the Target breach, all the way back in 2013, it came in through an HVAC vendor. And so that was kind of the first major one that we've seen that wasn't specific, and a specific attack on a specific entity. It was through a different entity, the vendor in this case. And then over the years, not Petya, 2017, we saw what kind of damage that caused. We have SolarWinds in 2020, and then obviously leading to where we are today with Change Healthcare, CDK Global, CrowdStrike, et cetera. So as the world gets more interconnected, certainly we're going to see more of these. And the question is, how do entities stay cyber resilient, and how do we underwrite to that risk? Let me move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so we've clearly seen ransomware kind of dominating in 2024. We previously talked about like big game hunting. When I first started in cyber, ransomware gangs were in a smash and grab business model. We paid lower amounts for decryption keys, and demands were much lower than we see today. The threat actors no longer have just like their hand in the cookie jar. They've taken the cookie jar and they've taken the candy jar, and they're in the snack closet and they're eating all the Cheez-Its right now. The threat actors are at the point where their demands are much higher because they have a better knowledge of who they're attacking. The threat actors are also well aware of insurance. We always advise our clients to kind of hide their insurance policies, put them in a place where threat actors can't necessarily access them. I've seen in the past when dealing with a threat actor and they've gained access to the insurance policy, they have a demand, somewhere near limits or above limits, and it's really difficult to kind of negotiate with them. With that said, with threat actors being, big game hunting and knowing who they're attacking, I'd say that our insureds are also better situated to combat the need for a decryption key. While backups aren't a full fail-safe, properly segmented and tested set of backups are probably the best mitigation against actually paying a ransom. We've seen numerous of our insureds able to restore from backups without having to pay the threat actor for a decryption key. We talked about having your business continuity plan in place and testing your disaster recovery plan. Testing the ability to recover from your backups is really important too. I want to mention that through our Edge platform, our insureds are able to use our breach and attack simulator to kind of simulate real life ransomware attacks from different variants. It's really kind of a cool product that we have that our Edge clients are able to use. You can upload these variants onto your system and see how your systems will respond in the event that you were attacked by one of these variants. The more prepared you are to undergo a ransomware attack and take the necessary steps to recover from the attack, the less you can expect your overall damages and losses to be. Participating in incident response tabletops and testing your business continuity plans are really important to knowing how to respond in the event of an incident. We also encourage our insureds to set up pre-breach relationships with both privacy counsel and a forensic firm. Having these relationships in place essentially ensures that you will be able to respond with swiftness to any kind of attack or incident that you have, and it'll also ensure that the firms kind of will act swiftly as well because they know how you operate. I'd like to talk about like driving factors in paying a ransomware and how quickly a company can recover really determines, how we negotiate with a ransom. Ultimately speaking, if you have a $1 million demand and the company is losing $1 million a day in profit, selling with a threat actor makes much more sense than trying to spend a week to recover from backups and spending of hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process. With that said, sometimes it's frustrating. The decryption keys aren't necessarily seamless, and you still need to recover from the backups anyway. So let's paint the scenario here, right? Because I want to talk about data suppression as well, and the term kind of makes me cringe a little bit. Let's paint a scenario. So we've beat the threat actor. We didn't have to pay for a decryption key because the insured was able to restore from backups without incurring a business interruption loss. Great job. But ultimately speaking, the insured wants to pay for data suppression because they want to limit the scope of the information that's posted on the dark web. In some business instances, this makes sense, but to pay for data suppression, but if you're dealing with like highly sensitive confidential information or just information that shouldn't be posted on dark web, it makes sense to pay in that. But like in an instance where you have run-of-the-mill PII, it probably doesn't make sense to pay for data suppression. It should be noted that like if the data is posted on the dark web or not, notifications still need to be made. I've had insurers in the past that have paid for data suppression and still have had a class action filed against them, whether the information was posted on the dark web or not. I want to point out that like the dark web is a hard place to access. You can't just go online and access the data if it's posted on the dark web. Additionally, and my last point on data suppression is even if we're paying the threat actor for the promise they're going to delete the data, we've seen through like an FBI takedown of certain ransomware gangs that the threat actors are not actually deleting the data. Through the FBI's investigation, they saw that all the data they said they were deleting wasn't actually deleted. So that's something to note there as well. And then, stopping the attacks kind of starts with the basics. First and foremost, you should have encrypted backups. You should follow this 3-2-1 strategy. You should have 3 copies of your backups. You should have the original data, an online copy of it, and an offline immutable storage solution. Having MFA is also really important. It should be something that you should have across the organization. We talked about the Change Healthcare breach. The CEO of United Healthcare had to go in front of Congress, and he had to admit that the organization did not have MFA on the system that was compromised in the attack. Had they had MFA across the entire organization, this ultimately could have been avoided. And then lastly, I preach this to all my clients when I'm on with onboardings or speaking to them. Employee awareness should be preached across the organization. Having difficult simulated phishing attacks may dupe people into clicking them. Like we've all been victims of these know before emails that have gone out where it's like send me a document really quickly or get a free turkey for Christmas or something like that. But it's really important to kind of have these real life simulated attacks that kind of test people and make people fall for it, because ultimately speaking, it makes people feel as if though that no one person is safe in any type of attack. So those are just kind of the steps that we suggest making in terms of trying to really stop attacks. It really is basic information. It starts with the basics, but you have to adopt that as an organization as a whole, as a kind of a philosophy, and have everybody on board with it.
Thanks, Mitch. Just 1 or 2 points I wanted to make specific to resilience and where we think we kind of make a differentiator in the market. If you think about traditional carriers, primarily what they're providing is an insurance policy and then a promise to pay a claim after. With resilience, the goal is not just insurance. It's a much more holistic approach, using an entire ecosystem to try to rid the world of cyber attacks. And so at Resilience, obviously, we have the insurance part with underwriters and a claims team. Additionally, we have our customer success team, which speaks with our insureds throughout the entire life cycle of the policy, checking in, seeing if there's any issues, saying we're there for you, and having them speak with an underwriter or someone from the claims team if necessary, should they have any questions. We also have a data science team, a threat intelligence team, software engineers, and the edge product, which Mitch referred to. All these things work together hand in hand, and it's a feedback loop. So it's not as simple as underwriter sells the policy, forget about it unless there's a claim. It's underwriter sells the policy, customer success works with them, threat intelligence monitors to make sure that there's no issues. for which if there is, we will immediately reach out to you and tell you there's an issue to try to stave off any sort of financial harm to your company. The threat intelligence team is constantly looking out to make sure, what are the new threats on the horizon, monitoring the dark web. Our data science team takes every claim, breaks it down and does an autopsy of it, and tries to then figure out what exactly went wrong and how can we make improvements moving forward in terms of the renewal. Additionally, the edge product and our software engineers. So I think when you talk about practical tips and what can your carrier do for you, I'm very proud to say Resilience really does go above and beyond in terms of what they're providing versus some of our competitors. Let's go to the next slide. Point of failure analysis. Let me kick it over to Scott for this one.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. So we're just going to continue the conversation, and I'm just going to walk us through this chart real briefly, but we wanted to break this down, and we've already touched on some of this through the presentation, but what this is basically for our material claims, like we talked about earlier, what that means to us in 2024. How did they start, right? Like that's what we're here talking about today, and so, the ones I wanted to point out really, and we already started talking about that, but like phishing, 14.7%. I mean, that's, I think Mitch spoke about it earlier. Employees, right? Like it's tricking people. Like that's all it is. Like phishing, credential compromise. It's still a top initial access point. Like it just, people fall for it. Like you could do all these employee tradings and click the button. Like you feel proud of yourself, but it does happen. It's still a problem. But really, like what we're talking about today, that right side of the chart, like the vendor, 47.1% of our material claims started with the vendor. So that's really, this goes to show you like what we're talking about today and why it's important. So, sorry, I'm just seeing a question pop up in the chat. So, which we will try to address. So,
yeah, they were asking about non-cyber claims, which probably
okay.
into media related claims, copyright infringement, trademark type of claims. Those are the non-cyber claims that we're seeing there that our policy covers.
Perfect, thanks. And and the rest of the chart, I'm not going to really walk through it, but software vulnerabilities, we just talked about that, 8.8%. Thanks, Mitch, for grabbing that question on what non-cyber means. Our policy does have insuring agreements and coverage for some non-cyber related matters within our policy, but that's what we're talking about, copyright infringement, as Mitch just mentioned, or payment controls, that's another one, transfer fraud situation. But I didn't really have much more to say on this slide, but really the main point and takeaway for me that I think people should walk away with here, and that number at the bottom sort of astonishing, that 450%. But really 47.1% of our material claims began with the vendor. So that I think is our main takeaway for this conversation and this slide in particular.
And Scott, we kind of talked about it in previous slides. Outside of vendor claims, a lot of these claims could be avoided just by having proper employee training. In the instance of payment controls, transfer fraud, making a single phone call to the person who should be sending you the instructions could avoid millions of dollars in loss. Ultimately speaking, people who are more aware of or hyper aware of phishing attacks, not clicking on those links, or we often have claims where people say somebody emulating the IT department called them up and kind of asked them to download information onto their systems. Being aware that the IT department's probably not going to call you to ask you to download some sort of team viewer onto your system, and just really just having good employee training could avert all a majority of these claims if people are just aware of what they should be looking for.
Yeah, just to quickly put a pin on that. I mean, when we look at the point of failure analysis, essentially what we're seeing is the human factor. And how do we stave that off? And it's everything we've said. You need obviously comprehensive cybersecurity training as an entity. You need to conduct phishing simulations. Whether it's password or data usage or a privileged access management tool, incident response planning, vendor risk assessments, fostering a culture, of reporting suspicious activity. It's we've been saying this for years and years. It's not an IT problem anymore. This is the entire company, from the CEO to every single employee in the company needs to be vigilant and involved. And there has to be a company culture of being very, very careful, because almost all of these situations occur from human error. And a lot of this can just be avoided with education, but also with certain security tools that are necessary, that a company would have. As I mentioned earlier, a privileged access management tool would be but one example. But there's education and there's technological examples. Let's move on to the next slide. So did I skip one? No. Okay, sorry. So looking ahead for 2025. So let me start, I believe, with Scott.
No, I'm gonna.
Oh, sorry about that, Mitch. Okay.
I mean, the full scope of vendor risk attacks that we've seen, we haven't seen the full scope of the attacks in terms of supply chain and third party attacks. We've yet to realize, what the scope of Change Healthcare is. Threat actors are going to continue to disrupt vendors with large scale reach to their clients. We talked about big game hunting. If a threat actor can attack a technology vendor that ultimately can disrupt thousands of clients, they're going to, right? This isn't going to change in 2025. I ultimately think it's going to go up. We talked about taking precautions. Taking the necessary precautions that we talked about earlier is paramount to avoiding like full scale shutdowns. Through our Edge program, we provide vendor assessments. Having proper vendor assessments with your vendors that are out there, looking at indemnity provisions with your vendors is really important. Knowing how your business will respond and repair in the event there's a critical system that goes down is really important. I keep harping on this: testing your business continuity plan, your disaster recovery plans, and having workarounds, right? So, in the CDK, we talked about CDK earlier, where a lot of our insureds did not have workarounds in the event that all of their systems went down. Testing these plans and having a workaround in the event that you do have a system that's critical that goes down is really important. Ultimately speaking, it has to be something that's agreed to by the entire organization. If the IT department is telling the C-suite that they need to do these things, but the C-suite is not on board with it, it'll fail ultimately. So it has to be a company-wide philosophy that everybody kind of takes a hold of. These are steps that organizations should take to safeguard themselves against vendor interruptions. But ultimately speaking, they're just going to keep going. We see a new vendor interruption every couple of weeks. People kind of run around like a chicken with their head cut off. I think it's important as an organization, as an industry as a whole, like when these breaches do happen, we have to stop and take a deep breath, evaluate the situation, and see how the industry as a whole responds to those types of things. So.
Yeah, just a couple words on just limiting it. It's stuff that we've discussed, but I think it's important to reiterate. Obviously, as an entity, you need to do thorough third-party risk assessments. What software are you using, and with whom are you working, and what is their cybersecurity posture? Obviously, you need strong contractual requirements and obligations with any of the vendors with whom you work. So that in the event it's their fault and not yours, you're not on the hook legally. Obviously, cyber insurance plays a large part in that, making sure that you are covered in the event it even is somebody else's fault. You want to segment or insulate supplier systems. So make sure that if you're working with a specific supplier, they do not have the ability to take down your entire network. There needs to be supply chain transparency. So I think companies with whom they work with each other, they need to have an understanding of their cybersecurity posture. Do they have insurance? Just kind of be open and honest with the companies with whom you work. And then obviously continuous monitoring and incident response, both for yourself as well as those of your vendors.
And I think I'm taking the next one. Ransomware as a service continues to professionalize, and that is true. And what that means is that these ransomware groups are selling their goods, so to speak, to other groups to use. So less work, but more money, ultimately for them, or easier money, let's call it. But more broadly than that, really, like ransomware just continues to evolve. Like Mitch brought it up earlier with one of the FBI takedowns of these groups. We've learned a lot of information from that, and more recently there was another a data leak from Black Boss. That was the group that was recently leaked. So again, more information, internal information comes out about what these people are doing, and what they're doing they are profitable. They're acting like profitable businesses. And they're going to continue to evolve like any profitable business would, to make sure that they remain profitable. What does that mean? I think we mentioned it earlier, big game hunting, finding those big ones. But it's a continued cat and mouse game like it has been. They're going to adapt. The attackers will adapt. The protectors will adapt to what the attackers are doing. Then the attackers will shift their ways, and the protectors are going to have to keep up with it. But we have learned a lot just generally about sort of how they operate. With this Black Basta leak, information came out that they're specifically targeting their victims. They know their financial data. They know vulnerabilities of their systems. They have information on key employee contacts to try to social engineer in these organizations. And they have like running spreadsheets with like the attack status update. Like this is professional stuff. So everyone really, needs to take this seriously. And I know many have and heeded that warning, but others, and right, these groups, once they identify the victims, they would even prioritize them. We were going to talk about industries, and maybe we'll talk about that a little more, but what organizations, what kind of industries have like low tolerance for operational downtime? Like those are the industries that are more likely to pay. So when you're thinking about healthcare, manufacturers like that, it just makes them a more likely target. And these groups know that. Also, these communications reveal disagreements amongst the group, responsibilities, who's getting paid what, the approach that they should take on targeting these victims. So, not only does, the method continue to shift, the way they do business is changing, they are just trying to do anything to make a buck, and we all have to keep up. So, that's definitely something we'll keep an eye on in 2025. And then one other thing not on this list that I just wanted to bring up is litigation. Like in the U.S. especially, like it continues to be something that we have to deal with on the tail of a lot of these events, and organizations need to think about that as well. So that's something else for 2025. It's not new, but again, it's more frequent, and it's people are getting smart to insurance and the role it plays in this process, both threat actors and plaintiffs' attorneys. So,
Yeah, Scott, I think it's interesting to what you say there, where it's not new, but ultimately speaking, in terms of the litigation that we've seen, the class sizes have just shrank exponentially. Where in the past, at first it was had to be 100,000 people in a class, then it was 50,000 people in a class, and now I'm seeing classes as small as like 8,000 people, and you really see that there are plaintiffs firms out there that are looking for notifications to go out to the state attorney generals, and from there they're just filing suit because there's potential for payout there, and you ultimately have to look at what the total defense costs are on those matters and settle based upon that, not really based upon what the actual class sizes and everything like that. It's a new world in terms of class sizes from class actions being filed. So
yes, sir. And that
And
was it for me.
I'm sorry, Scott, did I interrupt you?
No, I was saying that was it. I was finished. Thank you.
So the final bullet for looking ahead in 2025, just wanted to speak a couple minutes on more industries will adopt financial quantification of cyber risk. So there's the old adage we've discussed, it's not a matter of if, but when. And so therefore, companies need to adopt a financial quantification. So not only what is your cyber risk, but then how much is this going to cost? And where do we allocate our dollars? Is it in insurance? Is it in prevention? Is it both? And how does the organization come together to make this decision? So this is something that organizations across all industries have to grapple with in 2025. So obviously you need improved risk communication within organizations. As I mentioned before, the old expression, it's not just an IT problem anymore, certainly holds true. The entire organization needs to be having discussions amongst each other on articulating what is the potential impact of our vulnerabilities and what are we going to do about it and how are we going to spend our money. Whether it's the CISO or the risk manager or the CFO or whomever it may be, they need to be able to articulate to others within their organization exactly where the financial risk lies. And how to solve for it. Where do you allocate your resources? What strategies are you going to use there? How do you demonstrate your return on investment? So if you say we want to spend $50,000 on this tool, are you able to then take that information and quantify by getting this tool? This is exactly what we expect to save, which is frankly our edge product at Resilience. That's essentially what that is doing. Then, of course, cyber insurance. That's all near and dear to us in terms of are you comfortable with the claims team that's going to be handling your matter? I think in cyber, the claims team is very unique. It's really where the rubber hits the road. It's new, it's cutting edge. You need to have expertise on the claims team, and really you're getting your insured at its worst. This isn't a lawsuit, and in the United States, it's a litigious society. Companies get sued all the time. I don't think it's a huge panic. You get to cyber, you're looking at a skull and crossbones on your computer system, and your business is completely down. And that's where the claims team comes in. And what claims team do you feel comfortable getting you from stop to go? And which claims team do you feel is going to have an understanding of to get you through this as quickly and painlessly as possible based upon their experience in the industry? And also looking at emerging threats. So when you think about how do I quantify my financial risk, what are the emerging threats that are coming out there? And what do I need to be looking at? So perfect example is what Scott and Mitch mentioned before, increasing litigation. So maybe a couple years ago, you weren't thinking about that as much as you are today. So you need to think about it technologically, but you also need to think about what is the claim going to look like? Is there going to be regulatory scrutiny? Is there going to be, class action lawsuit? What exactly are we looking at in the event of an issue? Which law firm do we want to use? Which data forensic incident response firm do we want to use? All of this needs to be discussed and hashed out beforehand. This is not something you want to do on the day you come into the office and there's a skull and crossbones on the computer. And finally, there's some certainly technology can play a part in this in terms of where you want to put your dollars. There's vendor security rating systems that can be used. Which cloud do you want to use? How is their security? Zero trust architecture, third-party risk management platforms, continuous threat monitoring, EDR. So there's all these tools that you want to look at instead. So a lot to look at. This is actually our final slide. So I'm going to go to Q&A and see if there are any questions out there. We seem to have a couple of questions. I will throw it out to Scott and Mitch, and I might chime in myself. One is, in industries where there are a limited number of providers for a necessary function like CDK or change, what can people do to mitigate the risk of these bottleneck vendors?
I I could take that one. I mean, there might, in a situation like that, there might not be a lot of like softwares that do all the same stuff. Look at your contract, of course. Which way does the indemnity flow? Who's responsible for, notifications? You have a change healthcare situation. But really, like, how is your business functioning, and what is this vendor, what do they do for you, and how does it impact your business, and really thinking about that ahead of time. And Mitch spoke about it throughout the presentation, and it's so right. Like, you got to prepare for that. Like, if you know what you're using CDK for, and you realize you're using it for your inventory, like, it goes down, what are you doing in the meantime? Like, figure that out. We don't have the answers as we sit here, but that's something that every organization needs to think about and take amongst themselves. And it's specific to them, what they do, specific to their vendors, which vendors they're using, which ones are critical to their business operations, which ones are like, all right, we can handle that. And maybe it's not as critical to the day to day of what we're doing or what the insured organization is doing.
I've had these conversations with insureds on our onboardings where they're like, well, these incidents have happened where system critical systems have gone down, but it's not practical for us to have a backup for our main, software provider, because just the price associated, and our insureds are growing frustrated because they don't necessarily have a workaround in terms of when one of their systems goes down. But it's, we've been preaching this entire time. It's really important to put the funding into testing, what happens in the event that these systems do go down. Like I said, it's not practical to have a backup for your main system, but also in the event that you are vetting main critical systems for yourself, remembering which systems were kind of second place to your main critical system. In the event that you can, migrate to that system, if you can't bring your systems back up online after those vendors have gone down, that's something to think about. But ultimately speaking, it's just a growing frustration with our insurance, because, like I said, it's not practical for them to have a second place in the event that one of their systems goes down.
Thanks, guys. Another question that just came in. We hear a lot about AI, obviously. Is AI a factor in cyber claims you are handling or reading about?
Yeah, I mean, so we haven't seen a ton of AI claims on our book just yet. However, there is a large kind of ominous cloud hanging over claims in general, for the threat that there will be a ton of AI claims coming out. AI is crazy, right? It's evolving every single day. It's hard to kind of delineate what it can and can't do, and the it seems endless what it can actually do. So we talked a lot about human in the loop training. Uh, I think as AI evolves, our training is going to evolve to try to ask questions that trick AI. Ultimately speaking, making phone calls after you've spoke to something that could potentially be AI is really important. Really, working together with your employee training providers, and making sure that employees know how to kind of delineate between AI and what's not AI is really important there. But the main crux of the question is that we haven't seen a ton of claims coming out of it, but we're expecting them to come eventually.
I think AI, it's really just a wait and see. We recall back when the GDPR was coming out, and everyone was panicking about that and how that would play out. And knock on wood, it hasn't been a major factor in terms of claim payments. So with AI, it's kind of a wait and see. We are well aware of it. We're prepared to provide advice to any of our insureds or customers in terms of how to prepare for it, how to mitigate any issues. But thus far, if we were to just look at our claims pending, it has not been a major issue. Another question came in. Can organizations who are impacted by a vendor incident successfully hold the vendor financially responsible? I guess I will start with that since I had mentioned it before. So it's hard to answer that. The question is going, it really comes down to what is your contract with them, and then how is the lawsuit going to play out? So if you've been impacted by a vendor incident, can you successfully hold them financially responsible? It's unclear. Now, again, we've been talking for the duration of the webinar about preparation, and one of the ways you want to prepare is making sure you've worked with your legal department or outside counsel to button up any of the contracts you have with any of the vendors with whom you're doing business. And certainly you would want something in the contract which says, in the event this was caused by you and not us, we will hold you financially responsible. So the way the insurance would work is our insured, should they have an incident, most likely the claim would be covered and we would pay. And then if the contract was a strong contract and we thought that there was another party that was responsible, we would initiate a subrogation proceeding against the responsible party. So hate to give this answer, but the answer is it depends, and it depends on whose fault it is, can you prove whose fault it is, and what does the contract look like?
Yeah, and I'll just tack on real quick. And, there's different jurisdictions, different laws, but really it is about that contract and getting outside the contract. Usually, it's usually a higher standard, which can be difficult at times. So, the question for us, if we're like considering whether or not to do that, is the quantum, the amount in play, obviously the facts, and whose responsibility this actually is or isn't. Is it clear? But then again, you have to actually like go after it and spend money to do that. So, it's that part of everything else we talked about today. That's also an evolving piece of the cyber landscape, is sort of ultimate responsibility, subrogation. It's another evolving area. So can't answer the question directly, but it's something that's being thought about for sure. And when appropriate, yes, you can go after them. It's just, will you be successful? Unclear.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So when I started, I had noted that Scott and Mitch live and breathe cyber. I think it's been obvious that they do based upon this webinar. I do as well. Unfortunately, time is up, so we're going to be wrapping up this webinar. But feel free to reach out to us. You have our emails with any questions you may have. It's been a pleasure conducting this webinar for you. And I wanna thank everyone for their time.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all.